Hello, Summertime English 1102 students. Welcome to my video lecture on A Rose for Emily by William Faulkner. Before we get started, what you might want to do if you haven't done so already is go ahead and pause this video for a minute, go into the same folder where you found this lecture, and pull up the slideshow and open up the PowerPoint slideshow on fiction and narration. And I will pause here for a minute while you do that. Also, if you have this textbook, then you can turn to page 74. Yes, turn to page 74 and look at that. Or if you're using a different version, find Rose for Emily, and we will talk a little bit about certain passages in this book as we go through the lecture. So I'm going to pause for a minute, hit the pause button, go ahead and do what you need to do, and come back and see me in a second. All right. Welcome back. So, A Rose for Emily by William Faulkner. I'm going to go ahead and go into the slideshow. The William Faulkner portion of the slideshow starts on on slide number 14. So, if you'll go to slide 14, you'll see a picture of Faulkner there with his pipe. And, of course, it'll have his birth date and his death date. You can see that during the time that William Faulkner lived, it was a very transitional and very turbulent time in the South. And one of the main themes of this story is actually going to be the New South kind of forcing the Old South out. You know, the New South kind of forcing the ways of the Confederacy out in order to establish a more progressive, more modern day South. So you can see by the birth and death dates of Faulkner, he lived through all of this. So this is nothing new to him. Because this story takes place in about the 1920s or 30s. It was actually published in 1931. So actually it takes place in the 1920s. And that would have been about the time when Emily would have been in her 70s, had she been a young debutante during the Civil War. Or just right at, or actually been born right after the Civil War, excuse me. So that would have... no, actually she would have been a debutante during the Civil War. So that kind of gives you an idea of that. All right. Let's go to the next slide. So Old South versus New South. We are going to go ahead and open up our story and immediately start with, well, let's just do the first two paragraphs. First paragraph, very opening paragraph of the story. When Miss Emily Grierson died, our whole town went to her funeral. The men threw a sort of respectful affection for a fallen monument. This is a woman that we're talking about, and an elderly woman by the time she dies, and yet she is a monument. What is she a monument to? The Confederacy, to the Old South. That is what she's a monument to. The women, mostly out of curiosity to see the inside of her house, which no one save an old manservant, a combined gardener and cook had seen in at least 10 years. So the women are just a bunch of busybodies. Nobody's been in there in years. We got to go see what's on the inside. Well, ladies, if you haven't read this story yet, there's a surprise ending. In fact, if you haven't read this story yet, why don't you go ahead and shut this thing off and go read the story and come back. Because I really do want to talk about the ending a little bit. But careful what you wish for, ladies. You want to see the inside of the house, you might get more than you bargained for. All right. Next paragraph. It was a big, squarish frame house that had once been white. What do we mean by once been white? What color is it now? Well, it's probably a dingy yellowish color or a dingy grayish color. Because, see, one thing we're going to learn about Emily is when her father died, he did not leave her any money. He left her the house, and that's all she had was the house. And she couldn't afford to paint it. She couldn't afford to keep it up. Remember, they have to bust down the door to the bridal suite, if you will, at the very end of the story. So the house has kind of been neglected and it's kind of decaying. Kind of like this South. The Old South was decaying. The Old South was old and it hadn't been kept up. And it was kind of decaying. And the New South was coming in and taking over. All right. So it had once been white, decorated with cupolas and spires and scrolled balconies in the heavily lightsome style of the 70s. And by the 70s, I mean the 1870s. Set on, and now this is important, set on what had once been our most select street. Of course, we're talking about Jefferson, Mississippi here. Jefferson, Mississippi, by the way, does not exist. It's a fictional town. that William Faulkner created. And it's in the fictional county of Yoknapatawpha County. So he's kind of saying, okay, what's our most select streets? In other words, when this house was built, there was mansions all up and down the street. So let's say the name of the street is Main Street, just for fun. When Main Street first became into being, there were mansions of all the richest families, all the most important people of Jefferson. The mayor, the police chief, the business owners, the plantation farmers. Everybody living on that street had name and had money. But look at what's happened now. So once our most select street, very next sentence, but garages and cotton gins had encroached and obliterated even the august names of that neighborhood. Only Miss Emily's house was left, lifting its stubborn and coquettish decay above the cotton wagons and the gasoline pumps. Cotton wagons and gasoline pumps. What had once been the most select street in Jefferson, Mississippi, is now an industrial section. And it would be completely industrial, except that Emily never moved out of that house. And that house is still there, surrounded by industrialized things like gas pumps, cotton wagons, mills, factories, etc. We keep going. Lifting its stubborn and coquettish decay above the cotton wagons and the gasoline pumps, an eyesore among eyesores. So, while Emily Grierson lived in what used to be one of the nicest houses in Jefferson, now it is so ugly that even the gas stations and the factories are not as ugly as Emily Grierson's house has become because of the years of neglect. So, while everything is changing around the Grierson house, that Grierson house and its main tenant, Emily Grierson, are not changing. They are the same. They are the Old South, stubbornly hanging on, even as it falls apart, while the New World or the New South is encroaching around them. All right. So that covers the refusal to change, and of course Emily's going to refuse to change. And let's talk about when she won't pay her taxes. That actually comes up. That actually is the third paragraph. Okay. So, alive, Miss Emily had been a tradition, a duty, a care, a sort of hereditary obligation upon the town. How can a town decide to just keep taking care of this lady, even though she's, bonkers? Dating from that day in 1894, when Colonel Sartoris, the mayor, who had fathered the edict that no Negro woman should appear on the streets without an apron, remitted her taxes. Okay. So, it's still a racist South, right? No Negro woman can appear on the street without wearing the apron that she works in. So that was the law under this old mayor, Colonel Sartoris. He's a colonel probably of the Confederate Army. He probably never served a day in the Union Army or the United States Army. But even after the Civil War ended, all of these folks that had titles, military titles, which, by the way, they had earned by money, not by military ability, which is probably one of the reasons why the South lost the Civil War. Among other reasons, but one of the reasons is the rich folks got to be colonels and got to be majors. Some of them got to be generals. The poor folks had to be privates. Up north, the people that had been trained at West Point got to be the officers, the people that were actually military-minded. So that's one of the reasons why the South lost the war, but it's also why Colonel Sartoris still, in 1894, almost 30 years after the Civil War ended, still has the title colonel, because he bought that title and it was for life. And he's the mayor of Jefferson. So Colonel Sartoris invented an involved tale to the effect that Miss Emily's father had loaned money to the town, which the town, as a matter of business, preferred this way of repaying. Only a man of Colonel Sartoris' generation and thought could have invented this, fictional tale, and only a woman could have believed it. So we've got a pot shot at women right here, don't we? So, because Colonel Sartoris comes from a chivalric South, where gentlemen are gentlemen and ladies are ladies, and gentlemen always take care of ladies, Emily has just lost her father, and her father did not leave her a dime. So now here is the Grierson house that needs to pay its taxes. Colonel Sartoris actually invented a lie. He invented a tale saying, oh, well, your dad owned Jefferson or loaned Jefferson a lot of money. We can't afford to repay it, so what we'll do is you no longer have to pay taxes ever. Okay. Now, going back to the refusal to change. Colonel Sartoris will die, and the new generation, the younger generation, is going to expect Emily to pay her taxes because she's a citizen of Jefferson. Therefore, she must repay her taxes. The next generation, with its more modern ideas, became mayors and aldermen. This arrangement created some little dissatisfaction. So they keep mailing her. They keep mailing her bills. She keeps sending them back and not paying them. They are going to visit her. All right. Down at the very bottom of 74. This is the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. About the 6th paragraph down. So these mayors and aldermen, basically city councilmen, if you will, rose when she entered. A small, fat woman in black with a thin gold chain descending to her waist, vanishing into her belt, leaning on an ebony cane with a tarnished gold head. Her skeleton was small and spare. Perhaps that's why she would have looked. What would have been merely plumpness in another was obesity in her. She looked bloated. Her body's got so big that her frail little skeleton can't hold it up. She looked bloated. What bloats, folks? Have you ever seen a dead body over time? It will bloat. So she looked bloated, like a body long submerged in motionless water, and of that pallid hue. Her eyes, lost in the fatty ridges of her face, looked like 2 small pieces of coal pressed into a lump of dough. So here she is. Even her own appearance says that she's among the walking dead at this point. She's no longer of any use to society. She is no longer a part of society. She has pretty much died, but she's still walking around. So, of course, they tell her about it, and then a couple paragraphs later, her voice was dry and cold. I have no taxes in Jefferson. Colonel Sartoris explained it to me. Perhaps one of you can gain access to the city records and satisfy yourself. But we have. We are the city authorities, Miss Emily. Didn't you get a notice from the sheriff signed by him? So the sheriff has sent her a bill saying either you pay your taxes or you go to jail. I received a paper, yes, Miss Emily said. Perhaps he considers himself the sheriff. I have no taxes in Jefferson. But there is nothing on the books to show that, you see. We must go by the, see Colonel Sartoris, I have no taxes in Jefferson. But Miss Emily, see Colonel Sartoris. Now look at what the parenthetical at the very end of this first chapter says. Colonel Sartoris had been dead almost 10 years. I have no taxes in Jefferson. Toby, show these gentlemen out. So, the new generation wants her to pay her taxes. The new generation wants her to be a good citizen to the current Jefferson, Mississippi. But because some old man who has been dead for 10 years and is no longer the mayor told her she had no taxes, but the city has no record of this. It was more of a gentleman's agreement. I probably have to believe that Colonel Sartoris didn't think she'd live much longer, not without any money. So there's no record of the fact that she's been excused from paying taxes. The city wants her to pay the taxes, but she refuses to give in. So that is another part of the refusal to change. The Old South refusal to change. All right. Shocking ending. The clues are planted throughout the story. What clues can you think of? You may even hit the pause button and write them down if you want to. Okay, so what clues are planted throughout the story? So that at the very end, when we find out that Homer Barron is has wasted away and is probably mummified, if you will, in the upstairs bedroom of Miss Emily, and oh, by the way, the pillow next to him has her head indention in it and one of her gray hairs. Think about that for a moment. But there are clues throughout. One was the stench. right about the time he disappeared, there was a horrible stench in her yard. Let's take a look at the moment of the stench. I think that that is a very important key here. This is on page, in our book, actually page 75. So what's happened? This is in chapter 2, 1, 2, we'll count that as paragraphs. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So basically, not counting the conversations, there's a full paragraph, then there's a conversation, then there's another paragraph. So about the second full paragraph. The first one after the conversations, after Judge Stevens, who is the sheriff or the mayor at the time, basically says, well, you know, that stench is probably some snake or a rat, and of course he uses the N-word, killed in the yard. This would have been common language of the time. All right. The next day, Judge Stevens received 2 more complaints. So now Judge Stevens has received 3 complaints that there is a horrible, horrible odor coming from Miss Emily Grierson's house. And something must now be done. You know, the first complaint, the lady complained. He says, oh, don't worry about it. It's probably just a dead snake. The third complaint, okay, we better do something about this. So let's take a look at it. All right. The next day he received 2 more complaints, one from a man who came in diffident deprecation. We really must do something about it, Judge. I'd be the last in the world to bother Miss Emily, again chivalry, but we've got to do something. That night the Board of Aldermen met. Now take a look at this next part. 3 graybeards and 1 younger man, a member of the rising generation. So the 3 graybeards suggest what? These are old men. These are probably Civil War veterans. These are the Old South. And of those 4 people on the city council, one of them is a younger man who is a part of the rising generation. It's simple enough, he said, talking about the young man. Send her word to have her place cleaned up, give her a certain time to do it, and if she don't, and immediately before he can even finish the sentence, Judge Stevens interrupts and says, damn it, sir, will you accuse a lady to her face of smelling bad? So, the 3 graybeards, or the 3 older men, are not going to come up to Emily and say, hey, your house stinks. You need to do something about this. The younger man has no qualms about that at all. He doesn't believe in the chivalry that his dad and his grandfather probably believe in. He believes this lady's got a stinky house. She needs to do something about it. Let's go tell her to do something about it. So again, this is a transitional time period. This is a time period when the New South is starting to rise and the Old South is starting to lose its grip. But it's also a clue, because notice they never find what's causing that odor. They sneak into her, this is on page 76, it's the next page. They sneak into her yard. The town leaders sneak into her yard and spread lime across the yard, hoping that the lime will eat up whatever is the dead animal that's doing the stinking. And even to the point where they open up her cellar, but rather than go down there looking for the animal, they just kind of throw the lime in the cellar, and off they go. So there's a clue. What other clues do we have? Well, Homer disappears. Homer, of course, being her new boyfriend after her dad dies. There's also the time that she purchased the rat poison, and she wanted the strongest available, and would not tell the druggist what it's for. So basically, he wrote 4 rats on there because the law required it, but he didn't know. In fact, he didn't even bother to bring her the poison packet. He made his employee bring her the poison packet because he didn't want to get in trouble. By he, I mean the pharmacist that put it together. So there are other clues throughout as well, but those are some of the main ones. All right. Symbolism in the story, we've talked about ad nauseum. The house is a symbol of a time that won't change, and yet it's deteriorating and it's crumbling and falling apart. Emily herself is a symbol. We saw that she looked like the Walking Dead. We also see that she is refusing to change with the times. The Grierson family symbolizes a little bit of insanity there. The town has to adapt to Emily, not the other way around. Now, let's talk about Emily's need to hold on to the significant men in her life, even after they die. First man that was significant in her life was her dad. Now, yes, it's true that fathers want to protect their daughters, and fathers want to have some say in who their daughters date. That's just natural, you know. Daddy's little girl needs to be protected. But Emily's dad is crazy. In fact, the whole Grierson family is crazy. Remember, there was that moment where the cousins visited, and they were more Grierson than Emily ever was, which basically means they were more crazy than she ever was. Let us take a look at her father. This is... This is on page 76 in our book. In fact, this is the paragraph after the men went into the yard and started spreading stuff around. So the people began to feel sorry for her. People in our town, remembering how old Lady Wyatt, her great aunt, had gone completely crazy, at last believed that the Griersons held themselves a little too high for what they really were. Emily will do that throughout the story, right? She holds herself up as a lady, as a very wealthy lady. Yet she doesn't have 2 nickels to rub together. So she holds herself up a little too high. None of the young men were quite good enough for Miss Emily and such. We had long thought of them as a tableau. Miss Emily, a slender figure in white in the background. Now remember, she's fat whenever the town aldermen come to visit her. So fat that her eyes are sunken back into her head. But as a young lady, she was slender. And she may have even been attractive for all we know. A slender figure in white in the background. Her father, a spraddled silhouette in the foreground. His back to her, clutching a horsewhip. The two of them framed by the back-flung front door. So when she got to be 30 and was still single, we were not pleased exactly, but vindicated. Even with insanity in the family, she wouldn't have turned down all of her chances had they really materialized. In other words, she was an old maid at 30, mainly because her father would not approve of any boys dating her or marrying her. So, now she's 30 years old. The most significant man in her life is her father, and he dies. So what does she do? When people come in to pay their respects and to take the body away, remember, she says that my father is still alive. This is actually, I think, in the next paragraph. Actually, it's 2 paragraphs later. The day after his death, they all prepared to call in the house and offer condolence and aid, as is our custom. Miss Emily met them at the door dressed as usual, with no trace of grief on her face. In other words, she's not wearing mourning clothes. She's just dressed like it's a regular day. She told them that her father was not dead, and she did that for 3 days, with the ministers calling on her and the doctors trying to persuade her to let them dispose of the body. Just as they were about to resort to law and force, she broke down and they buried her father quickly. In other words, he did not get a proper funeral because after 3 days of laying in the house, actually 4 days, of laying in the house, rotting away, what kind of a funeral are you going to have? I mean, the body is going to be so decomposed and it's going to smell so bad you can't have a funeral. So she refused to acknowledge her father's death. So Homer Bailey comes in. And you'll see on the slide that the next thing we're going to talk about is how her relationship was scandalous. How she was living in sin with Homer. And he was a Yankee. Remember, this is about Old South, New South. A lady of Emily's generation, whose dad had fought against those stinking Yankees from the North, should never have dated a Yankee and certainly wouldn't marry a Yankee. But she dated him and she courted him. And they lived in the same house. He would spend the night over at her house. And that is no bueno in the Old South. Or the New South up until probably a couple of decades ago. So, but getting back to Homer, apparently he must have left her and decided that he was going to never come back. And Miss Emily was having none of it. So, what does she do? She murders him, puts his stinking carcass in the bed next to her, and sleeps next to him at night. And you know that because they found a strand of hair on the pillow next to his body, and with the pillow being permanently indented by her head. So, Miss Emily will not let go of the men in her life. Once she offs Homer Bailey and has him safely tucked away in the upstairs bedroom, she never dates again. She never has another boyfriend again, and she hardly ever leaves the house again. She really stays in seclusion for the rest of her life because she now has a man. He doesn't live and breathe. He doesn't talk to her, but she has a man in the house. So she cannot let go of these significant men. Now notice, though, when her dad died, everybody knew it, and took the body away, even though she fought them on that. But nobody knew that she had murdered Homer. Not until she was already dead, and they found his mummified corpse up in the bedroom upstairs. That's when everybody realized, oh my gosh, that's what happened to Homer Bailey when he vanished. Nobody even thought to investigate her, and nobody really missed Homer when he left. But there he was. All right, so she won't let go of the man. Again, a woman of the South should not date a Yankee, so she doesn't. So it's kind of scandalous when she does. Certainly should not live together outside of wedlock, and they do. So that's kind of scandalous. All right. So we've got the big surprise ending, the clues planted throughout the story, and there it is again. And the ending reveals her insanity. Now, here's the final thought I want you to have on this, and then I'll go through the little questions thing and see if there's anything else. But Emily will never serve a day in jail for murder. She got away with it for many, many years. So much so that in the end, she didn't even go upstairs anymore because she was too elderly to go up and down the stairs. So Homer rested in peace upstairs, and she stayed downstairs and slept down there. She will never serve a day of jail time because by the time everybody found out about it, she had already been buried in that cemetery next to all the old big names of Jefferson. But Toby, the servant, is never going to serve a day either. Remember, he let the folks, after Emily died, he let the folks in the front door and skedaddled right out the back door. Didn't look behind his shoulder or anything. He just said, come on in, folks. Zoom, he's gone. And even so, Toby's so old now, he probably wouldn't serve more than a year in jail anyway. So Homer Bailey was murdered, and his murderer and the man that helped the murderer cover it up never have to serve a day in jail. They got away with it, at least on this earth. Now, of course, you can argue that Emily will have to answer for the murder in the next life. All right, so let's take a look at this, see if I've covered everything. So why does the town of Jefferson feel like it needs to take on Emily Grierson as a tradition, duty of care, and a hereditary obligation? Because she's a lady from the old South, and gentlemen just take care of their women. How does Emily Grierson's relationship with her father stunt her development into a woman? Remember, he would not let her date or marry any other man. He was the only man in her life. He lived until she was 30. You can imagine how difficult it would be for Emily to become a normal person at this point. You know, we have to let our daughters go out on dates. We have to let them get their hearts broken once or twice, even though we want to beat up the boy that causes it to happen. And eventually, hopefully, you know, the daughters grow up to be fine young women who become mothers of fine young children. But Emily did not get that. Her growth was absolutely stunted by her dad. All right, let's see. Okay, we've talked about that ad nauseum. And we've talked about the symbolism ad nauseum. So we've covered everything that's down here. So that's it. That's my video lecture on A Rose for Emily. I hope you found it enlightening. I hope that it helps you if you should decide to write your prose paper on this and do your research paper on it. And in the meantime, I hope you enjoyed the other 4 stories as well. And happy reading.